Kawhi Jordan Leonard. Kawhi Jordan Leonard was commonly known as the Claw, the closer, the closing one, Mr. San Antonio, Mr. Toronto Raptors. You know, this guy, man, we've completely forgotten about him, man. Kawhi Leonard. I believe, the disrespect and the hatred and the kind of, forgotten, nature that everyone in the NBA has towards him is very, disruptive, and it's very, it's unfound, and it's, I think it's completely, unacceptable, to how he's completely forgotten in the NBA, in the NBA atmosphere, and amongst his peers, amongst fans. He's very much disrespected, and the history of, I believe the history and what he's done gets completely disregarded because of the term, the term that was put around him, which is load management, which completely has nothing to do with it, and completely, it came before him, it came way before him, it came, back in the day with the San Antonio Spurs, where they would rest players, and even LeBron James, to where he would sit out games or miss a week or two, but he got termed with it after coming back from injury. San Antonio Spurs in 2018, that term got coined to him, and I believe it's completely in history. It will downplay or make his career or completely make him forgettable, which I believe is absolutely insane. When you look at Kawhi Leonard, he's one of the most complete basketball players we've ever seen, and I think and one of the greatest scorers, by the way, which I believe gets completely disregarded because of the counting stats, which do not work in his favor at all. And even earlier in his career, the disrespect he used to get was he was part of the San Antonio Spurs system. He's a system player. Even I've heard Kevin Durant in the past say, when Kawhi got compared to Paul George when he was in Indiana Pacers days, Kevin Durant said, he's a system player and Paul George is in that system, and that became the notion league wide. Especially when he won his Finals MVP, averaging 17 points per game. The notion there was that he's a system player. He plays great defense, but if you put him somewhere else, or they said they said if he got drafted somewhere else, he wouldn't be the same player, and that Chip England deserves, the shooting coach at San Antonio Spurs deserves all the praise for improving him as a shooter. But I don't believe in any of that nonsense, man. Because when the player gets 8% of the credit, and that happens a lot in the NBA when players get criticized for being in systems. You've seen that a lot. A lot of other players, who've had to go somewhere else and prove themselves, that they're not a product of their environment and they're not, completely system players. And we've seen that with Kawhi Leonard, who at first came in the league as a spot-up player and a wide-open three-point shooter. Didn't really have a handle. Game was very, rough around the edges. But he had all the physical capabilities and the physical tools to become a great player. He had the Jordan-like hands, Shaq hands to be fair, and long arms, incredibly long wingspan. He had a kind of a decent touch around the rim. Was a great rebounder from the day dot. And so there he had the foundations of that. And then he added to his game. He became by year 3, year 4, he was a very versatile shot creator. Was a very good decision maker. The ball in his hands, still not natural, and you can see it in his game. He's still not as natural, but he developed to the point where he became a go-to guy. And once he became a go-to guy, he was able to, at the end of Tim Duncan's career, the last year, he was by far, he was a two-way player. He was a leading scorer, and he was a defensive player of the year, candidate every single year. And so then he became one of the best players in the NBA, and he was one of the most loved players. But then after the Spurs season, where he sat out after 67 games, after missing like more than half of the season, to where, and a lot of players don't do this. He took the matters into his own hands. He didn't believe he was healthy, and so he decided, I'm not going to play. If I'm not healthy, I'm not going to play. And so he decided to sit out the whole year, make sure he was healthy. And to that, he met a lot of backlash. Got a lot of backlash in the media of the likes of Skip Bayless and Michelle Beadle. But he was not, even his teammates, even his coach, but he was not really he was not willing, to budge to the pressure, to the peer pressure from his teammates. He was criticized by teammates like Tony Parker. He criticized, said they had the same injury, but Kawhi was like, I'm not going. And so he tried to force a trade to the Los Angeles Lakers that year. But Coach Pop and the GMs at Spurs, they traded him to Toronto to where, which is a very interesting situation. They traded him for DeMar DeRozan. They traded him and Danny Green for DeMar DeRozan to where he went there, and they had low expectations coming into the after they got swept by LeBron James, and Kyle Lowry was very against the trade, and there were a lot of questions about it because he had 1 year left on his contract, and Masai Ujiri took the risk. So yeah, Kawhi Leonard went there for the year, and he was able to do do the impossible, and bring Toronto Raptors their first ever championship, and it became but how he did it was in a very interesting way. Like, he went there, they had a very good system, isolation heavy for Kawhi Leonard, because as he was replacing DeMar DeRozan, and he answered all his doubters wrong. He killed all his doubters in that playoffs. Where he absolutely torched the entire NBA. He torched the defense of Giannis, Antetokounmpo, Malcolm Brogdon, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez. They couldn't guard him, and against arguably one of the most underrated talented lineups of the Philadelphia 76ers of 18-19. We had Joel Embiid, Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris was there. They had a lot of defenders and two-way players, and that shot he hit, will go down in history as one of the most impressive shots in NBA history. And he hit that shot, and that was one of the most greatest playoff runs I've ever seen. And even in the finals, he had one of the best stretches I've ever seen. In the clutch time where he hit like nine straight points, 2 threes and a mid-range and a layup, and that was one of the best runs. And he averaged 30 points per game, and he won the finals, and that kind of put to bed the notion that he was a system player. And he ended up winning the finals MVP that year, and that year obviously led to the big free agency to where Toronto Raptors were willing to do whatever they took to keep Kawhi Leonard there. And to be honest, with hindsight, looking back at it, it would have been a great move for him. I think he would have been able to settle there and become, just the system was perfect. Why, we'd never to that point we'd never seen somebody leave a championship team, after winning the title, and he decided no, he decided to, I want to challenge, I want to prove I'm the best player in another system again. I want to win three rings and 3 finals MVPs, and he took it down to the LA Clippers, and that was a very interesting first year. They went to the playoffs. They were heavy favorites, they were. Alongside the Los Angeles Lakers, and it looked like they were destined to meet in the finals, or in the conference finals rather. And that year didn't go too well. The mesh of him and Paul George, 2 scorers, that system there to where he became reliant as a playmaker. And that whole season he was load managing as also, but it didn't go down too well. He was load managing, but also because he came into a team where you had already a team that had already been to the playoffs and had already took the Warriors 6. The chemistry was a bit off in that first year, and you seen a lot of reports in the media about how it wasn't the best situation. So that first year was really a wash. Kind of, they lost in the conference semifinals to Denver Nuggets. But Kawhi Leonard still had a great playoff run. He had one of the great playoff runs. He averaged around 28 plus points per game. 8 plus rebounds, 5 assists. A couple steals, a couple blocks. So he was all around, absolutely dominant. I think he led the team in all statistical categories. He was absolutely dominant, but, the playmaking aspect wasn't completely natural to him and Paul George. They didn't have a point guard. So those were the questions around his game, if he wanted to be the Kawhi, the Michael Jordan of this generation, the Kobe Bryant of this generation, he needed to be a bit more fluid with it, with his playmaking, and a bit more, less ISO heavy, less Carmelo Anthony ISO heavy, which is, he's kind of developed tendencies. He's kind of developed, as he's got older and he's got more heavier and he's, slowed down a bit after the injuries he had, the injuries he had and the reasons why he had to load manage it. But yeah, so coming into the next year, it's a very decent year. They had a great run. Great, decent run towards the end of the season. Not a lot of pressure. As it was year 2, and so they came into the season retaining Rajon Rondo from the Los Angeles Lakers, and they went into the playoffs, kind of heavy favorites, and he had a very good playoff run against the Mavericks again. They got to the conference. They got to the conference semi-finals, but this time without him. After in the semi-finals to where against Utah, where he, unfortunately injured his ACL, and the Clippers got eliminated in the conference finals because they didn't have Kawhi, but they did make a good run. Paul George arguably reaching his full potential, and it led to questions, whether the Clippers were better without Kawhi, which is absolutely ridiculous. But you know, and it was crazy, it's crazy, and it's led into this year where they are not an elite team at the moment in time, and the questions are, being, asked if the Golden State Warriors are the favorites or Phoenix. Everyone's forgetting about the Los Angeles Clippers. To where I believe if Kawhi Leonard comes back this year, they can make a great run into the playoffs. They can make a very, they can make a run. Let's just say that, because they're a very good team now. They're one of the best teams in all statistical categories. But what you have right now is players playing out of position, out of roles. But Paul George is putting on a great show, and maybe when Kawhi Leonard comes back, he can put to bed the disrespect, and get himself back into that, that Kawhi, that KD, that LeBron conversation. He could take over and be one of the greats of this generation of all time, and have a good second after the end of his career. After being age 30 years old now, he's getting up there in age, and I believe he is one of the most disrespected players. But he just needs to, be in people's eye again. And I believe once he does that, he's gonna put on, and I believe he's gonna make a return this season. I believe he is. He's looked much different now. He's much more comfortable in himself and his teammates and the media wise. So, I think he'll be back. And I think he'll have something to say about this season. At the end of it, he could be the last man standing. Let me just say that. That's a wild prediction, crazy prediction I'm gonna make. I believe he has a chance to make amends and to win Los Angeles Clippers their first title too. But yeah.